Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, in this video, this is going to be the part two of Jodi ARIAS. The part one of Jodi ARIAS basically is kind of my clinical angle on Jodi ARIAS, okay? But I think, as with a lot of people, I think the clinical picture of a person really is not the whole picture of a person. I think we need to get away from this idea that psychology fully understands people. Psychology is kind of a clinical angle on people. But there are also poets, and there's novel writers, and there's journalists, and there's even just regular people. There's lots of other ways to see a person. And so in this video, I kind of want to bring my own sort of, let's say, poetic, kind of folksy, sort of grassroots, just as a regular person angle on Jodi. And this is where I want to talk about the Mormon side and some things that I think are really important juxtapositions with the Mormon side of this story. Okay, because I think at least for some people who grow up in the Mormon Church is just what they know. But for someone like Jodi, who has special issues, okay, I think the Mormon Church is kind of like another utopia, kind of like the MLM that Travis Alexander was working for, the legal insurance. Kind of like that was also kind of a utopian sort of a sales fantasy. And I think the Mormon ethos, the Mormon environment, I think is highly utopian, highly idealized, and I think that'll have a special significance. I think for someone like Jodi. Um, I'm not going to try to pile all the meaning of this murder just on the Mormon Church, but I think it's an important factor, and I think it really plays into the complexity of the relationship she had with Travis Alexander. Because I also think Travis Alexander had some issues that kind of played into the final outcome. So basically, where I want to get started with this is the idea that I kind of left out of the part one, which is that from a pretty early age, I think I'm assuming it's kind of like kind of adolescent and onward. I think there's record evidence that Jodi was at times very mean to her mother. Okay, she could be very cruel and very just sort of not very nice, like really not nice to her mother. Okay, now, of course, there's lots of different ways a person can have an anger management problem. There's lots of people who have a bad side when they get angry. That's not necessarily so important. But, in this case, we realized that was like the tip of the iceberg, and that she really had homicidal capability. Okay, so now I'm going to go outside the clinical. Okay, my impression of Jodi, just kind of my feeling about her and me as a cluster B, where I have my own issues. Okay, I have this weird feeling, and this is just a feeling, don't hold me to this, but I feel like Jodi had something in her that was kind of on the level of like a savage, like a savage. Okay. I don't mean that in a racist way. I don't mean that in any like putting down like native people or anything like that. I'm saying savage like anybody could be a savage. It doesn't matter what race you're from, and it doesn't matter what social class you're from. Some people have a savage element. Let's say there are a lot of professional athletes who have a savage inside, but they just take really good care of it and they're comfortable with it. Other people have the savage inside, but maybe they try to kind of put it in the closet, and it's more problematic. In my case, I'll just say right now, with my own cluster B experience, I feel like I have a savage inside of me. You know, and there's times when I'm kind of okay with it. I try to be philosophical about it. There's other times where it just really embarrasses me. Okay, because I feel like I lose control. Okay, and I've been struggling for decades. Well, maybe not decades, but I've been struggling for years. More than a few years, to really try to take the judgment away and try to kind of integrate that savage sort of into my life. And I've found that it's not as easy as people would think. It may take a lifetime, and there may be no simple way to do it. Okay. Now, one thing I want to talk about, before I get into talking about Jodi, is that I think there is a movement in psychology right now which I think is called family constellation something. It's kind of this idea that we have different elements inside of ourselves, like different, almost like characters inside of ourselves, different modalities or different schema. And that at some point, the idea is to just say that, hey, these are all good parts of me. They're just misunderstood and they just need love and welcoming and kind of this almost like cartoonish, like we still can't have the guts to maybe confront things inside of us that maybe aren't so nice and maybe really don't deserve to just be just automatically treated as good. Now, I'm not saying they're bad either, But I like to be a little more neutral about these things because I think there are parts of us that are so savage sometimes that there's almost like this excuse that gets put in psychology. Well, if it weren't for me getting abused, if it weren't for me being mistreated, if it weren't, well, no, maybe some of the things in us, and yeah, we may be abused in life. Okay, maybe I have been abused in life, but even still, regardless of that story and regardless of how true it is, there sometimes people have things inside that are kind of vicious, that are kind of like savage, you know. And I don't know that it's really helpful to always try to layer it with it's a good thing, it's a good thing, you know, I'm going to be good to it. You know, you don't have to be bad to it either. You don't have to think it's a bad thing either. But why not just let it be the thing that it is without trying to paint it? Because I think sometimes we try to like euphemize things. It's like we're afraid to see things as they really are. You know, whether without even deciding whether they're good or bad. Okay, so basically, like the savage inside of me, I'm not going to say it's good. I'm also not going to say it's bad. I'm just going to say it's a savage, you know. And yeah, it's very embarrassing because it takes over me, and then I lose control, and I feel terrible because, you know, I don't want to maybe own that that's really part of me, and maybe because I haven't fully accepted that part of me, you know. Maybe I think I accept it, but I don't fully own it, you know, and because I think maybe over time maybe I should be more courageous to own more the savage inside of me so that I can integrate it. Okay, and when I say integrate, I'm talking about what I've talked about in other videos, which is the idea of an organic process of metabolization. Okay, metabolizing things without trying to get an answer. Okay, I think what I hear with a lot of psychologies is they you know, psychology kind of pretends to make you do the work, but they kind of want an answer. Like, this is a good part of you. They give you the answer. It's a good part of you. It just hasn't served you well. You just have to be nice to it. It's all answers and answers. Why not just not have an answer? Why not just sit in the discomfort of the dilemma and the drama of having something inside of you that is like, you know, savage? You know, I mean, that is a big thing. You know, without having an answer, without deciding how good it is, without deciding how bad it is, just have it and be uncomfortable with it and trust that there is an organic metabolic process where you can organically metabolize things that don't have an answer. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's healthy not to have an answer because when you just let things not have an answer, I believe there's an organic way that we metabolize things that just don't have an answer. And that's only through time, through the organic process, the organic dialectical process, that we sort of go to a third level that you could never anticipate or project with, like, say, an answer from where you started. Okay. It's very important in life not to always have an answer to predetermine where you're going. Sometimes we can be surprised. You know, if you just sleep on a problem, if you have a dilemma and you think you know all the possibilities, if you sleep on it, you might have another possibility you never thought of. You know, because there's a metabolic process that happens just organically when we don't try to have answers and we just let things metabolize. Okay, so basically, that would be ideal, and even then, it would be difficult because I'm admitting how difficult it's been for me. But I think when I look at Jodi, I see the savage in her, okay? And instead of her even trying to sort of admit it into the onto the table and just even deal with the dilemma of what she has inside, it's almost like she completely dissociates from it. Okay, it's like, and she knows it's there. I know she knows it's there, but she just kind of dissociates from it, and she just decides that I'm going to be a very poised, almost too good to be true, completely under control, completely serene person, and I'm just like too good to be true. Okay, and so she really adopts kind of like the exact opposite, you know, and it's sort of like, wow. I mean, and I mean, that's an option. We can all try that, you know. Some of us get away with that, some of us don't, you know. But she really kind of, I think, leaves that savage just kind of like, wow, you know, just kind of like outside the picture, you know, because she just prefers to deal with being just too good to be true, with all this poise and all this like professional demeanor, almost looking more professional than her attorneys, like if you really didn't know better, you know. And of course we know it's all fake, but I'm just saying she chooses that. Okay. But then now what happens with the Mormon church? What happens with the MLM? Well, obviously the MLM is kind of like an idealized utopian subculture. You know, it's kind of like this very clean, very, you know, very champagne bubble kind of like middle class idealized utopia. You know, there's just no room for any pessimism, no room for any darkness, no room for any of the real dirtiness of real life. You know, it's like it's like, again, too good to be true. So that kind of matches her personality. But I think the Mormon Church even more so, because the Mormon Church is more transcendental about it. Okay. And I think also that, for a person like Jodi who feels she has that savage and who has a Mexican father, okay, subconsciously, I can't say there isn't a slight racial element to it. Okay. Now, I'm guessing, I could be wrong. I'm half Latin myself. I'm half Latino. My mother's Colombian. So, I'm guessing, could be wrong, but maybe Jodi, had some sense of herself through an ethnic lens that might have kind of put an unfair angle on the idea of her being a savage. Okay, because anybody can be a savage, it has nothing to do with ethnic origin, but she may have kind of carried very low grade, very subconscious kind of an idea of herself as sort of like a part Mexican, like a half breed, and maybe that she kind of maybe linked that unfairly to the savage, And also, there's all the tropes about Latin people with their hot tempers and all that. I'm just guessing, like, I don't know, maybe subconsciously. But the bottom line is that the Mormon church is really a very white, super white, in fact, whiter than white culture. Okay. I think the average white person would probably feel pretty dirty and messed up next to Mormons. Mormons are like, those people are so like they're so positive, they're so clean and they're thinking, they're so wholesome. It's like even a just a regular white person next to them will feel like like dirty. you know and so I'm just thinking, if she already has this idea even remotely that she has like a savage on the inside, or she, just dimly aware, there's a part of her that's kind of savage, and then maybe a light racial element, maybe not, I'll just leave that out there. This is just my, free association. But, encountering the Mormon church would be like encountering like not herself, but like the person she would like to be, but like turbocharged, okay, like on steroids. So she may have had this idea of her as being like this really poised, really, really serene person, but then she gets to these Mormons, and it's like, whoa, it's like, you know. And I think it can't be an accident that she experimented with being blonde. I know she used the blonde as kind of like a disguise for her crime, but I leave it on the table. I'm not going to take it off the table entirely. Um, and so she gets into this Mormon environment where she's competing with not only very white people, but very white utopian people, like super utopian people. And I think that's going to be very provocative, because I think that puts her, it puts her like monster, let's say. I say monster, I mean the savage. It puts that like really like in more tension than in the regular world. Okay. So I'm assuming that when she lived in California, working in the restaurant, just living with her boyfriend, I'm sure, just living in California, I'm sure her savage was still not welcome, but it probably wasn't with the same intensity as it would be, like, say, in the Mormon environment, where it's even more unwelcome. It's like more intensified, So, so I'm just assuming that whatever tensions Jodi had in the past before being Mormon, I'm assuming that those tensions became a little more intensified as she got into the Mormon subculture. Okay, so and also like I don't think it's fair to call the Mormons really a religion. I think they are an ethnicity. Okay, and I propose that. That's a proposal that I have. They're not just a religion. I think they are a culture and an ethnicity, effectively. And so I think as Jodi approached this ethnicity, I think she couldn't help see the contrast, both in her racial makeup. And yeah, of course, I know there's Latinos in the Mormon church, but I'm just saying that largely, I think it is really a very white, super white ethnic subculture, or whatever. So, so there was just more tension, I think, for Jodi, getting into this Mormon environment. Okay. Also, let's not forget that, living in California, it wouldn't be so out of place to be a little bit Latino, you know what I mean? But then get into this Mormon environment, and it's like just more tension. But I think the main driver is not really the ethnicity at all. I mean, I think that the main driver is just that idea that she had the dimly or subconsciously the sense of her having like like a savage, or her being part savage, and dealing with this super utopian, not just religion, but ethnicity culture that she was getting into. So where does that drive towards the murder? Okay, well, as it turns out, I think Travis Alexander was also part Mormon and part savage. Okay, now Travis Alexander was more white, and he had some genetic link to the Mormon Church through a grandmother, I believe. I don't know if the grandmother was like an old pioneer stock, or if she was also a convert. But the bottom line is that Travis had a little more ethnic coherence with the Mormon Church. He was a little less. He was a little more congruent with the actual makeup of the Mormon Church in terms of him being white and him having at least one ancestor that was also Mormon. So not so much tension for him. He could pass for a real Mormon. Okay, and I'm talking in kind of gross terms. I know the Mormons would hate what I'm saying because they'll say that all the Latins and all the Africans are all welcome. But we know that there's a history in the Mormon Church of being a little bit, very, very white, Eurocentric. Um, so I'm going to leave that on the table, and it can be debated, but I think it's an issue. So Travis had a lot of congruence in terms of his DNA and his family and his whatever with being Mormon. But here's the thing: Travis also grew up in a terrible drug addicted household. I think his mother was a drug addict, and he grew up in a super toxic white but super toxic upbringing. So I think Travis himself also had some sense of being a savage sort of on the inside. So you have two people that have their relative savages, and they're sort of aspiring into this very utopian world. I mean, it's not just a little different, it's radically different. They're proposing to get, to be on good terms in a church environment, in a new ethnic environment that is radically different from the way that they of some of the things they have inside, like say their savage elements. And so, like, you see the struggle that Travis has, where he wants to make money, he wants to have all the appearances of being the perfect Mormon specimen, the perfect Mormon success story. And on this, at the same time, he really had kind of like, say, I would say a pretty raunchy sex drive, which is okay. I mean, who cares, But I think he would have seen that as part of his savage, okay? And I think he and Jodi kind of found a private place to be really raunchy together, okay? And what that's us that while they're being Mormon, okay? So the tension is very, very pronounced. And I think both of them, on the one hand, are sort of enjoying the raunchiness and the bond they have as two savages together. But at the same time, I think they both are operating under a tremendous tension with the utopian environment of, this super clean, super white Mormon ideal. Okay, so that's got to be heavy for both. And I think Travis also struggled, and I think you could tell towards the end, Travis is sort of leaning towards getting away from Jodi, who is starting to be sort of a pain in the ass, and sort of moving towards maybe finding a Mormon, like an ideal standard Mormon wife that would not be Jodi. Okay, so he was leaning towards a more, a more stereotypical Mormon wife, and really driving towards that while the relationship with Jodi was kind of falling apart, and he was sort of leaving her in the dust. Okay, now why is that such a big deal? Okay, even before Travis like provoked her, because Travis later would have a major confrontation where he would just tell her, "You're just crazy, you're terrible," and just basically just saying you're just a trash. But before that happened, even before that, I think I can see why Jodi would feel so provoked by Travis sort of like leaving her behind, because both of them connected on a savage level, like a really raunchy savage level. And I think she really brought that out of Travis. And I think Travis loved it. I think he loved that part of himself. I think Travis really loved that part of their relationship, that they could connect as two savages. That's very intimate. And I think, savages generally feel pretty lonely. So we can find the occasional bond. That's a very special bond. And I think Jodi took it more seriously than Travis. Travis was able to eventually just kind of let it go and try to move on to a better woman. Whereas I think Jodi really felt that intimate connection. And so how's Jodi supposed to feel? Here's Travis living a double life. Travis is also pretending to be the super Mormon, and at the same time having this very subterranean, very super raunchy sexual contact and sexual bond with Jodi. Okay, and so on a deep level, I think Jodi feels like her savage found a contact, found someone who kind of accepted her even in the ways that Jodi doesn't accept herself, you know. And so and then for him then to just kind of cast it off and just kind of move off to exactly the opposite, to find some perfect Mormon girl, I think on some deep level that Jodi couldn't really articulate, that had to really, really hurt in light of that tension, but that she was operating with, where she was also trying to kind of like dissociate from the savage. So she also had hatred towards her own savage. So it's a very complex thing where Jodi has her own hatred, or I guess dissociation, from that savage part of her. But that savage part of her felt very bonded and then betrayed by another savage who's now going to go pretend to be super super perfect. Okay, so there's a lot of complex dynamics, and then on top of that, eventually Travis tells her to go to hell, like you're just trash, you know. And I'm thinking that Jodi, let's say the higher Jodi, I don't know what she would think, but I'd say the savage in Jodi probably thought that was like, you're not going to get away with that. Okay, and so, that basically explains the murder, and the savage she had was actually a very intelligent savage and very, very, I would say almost like a brilliant savage who is going to absolutely stop at nothing to make sure that she destroys this guy who's really attacking her, after using her for very raunchy sexual pleasure. And then after that, pretending like he's better and he can just drop her, you know. So I mean, there's a lot of dynamics in there where both of them have these savage and ideal elements sort of playing in contrast. And any of us who have a savage inside of us, if the savage can resent people who seem like they're accepting and then later turn their backs and make us feel like trash. Okay. Especially if it's a savage is very powerful. Now here's the final part I want to leave with. How could life have been different for Jodi had she had the courage or the opportunity to sort of metabolize the dissonance between, maybe the more ideal parts of herself and the more savage parts of herself. I'm not saying it would have been perfect, but if she has just somehow allowed that to organically metabolize without dissociating the savage, sort of in some way, I'm not going to say welcoming the savage, but letting it coexist without dissociation. If she had that courage to sort of let herself sort of take in being a savage and just kind of let it metabolize over the decades, what might have been different. Okay. Now, I think, I'm able in my imagination to see that the savage in her, okay, when it's in a violent mode, is extremely destructive. Okay. But how would her savage be when it's not in a violent mode? Okay, if it was more integrated, I think it's fair to say that in some cases, with some people, these like potentially super violent, very, very strong, aspects that deserve to be maybe called savage, in other situations, they could be greatness. Jodi, in another life, had she really metabolized the dissonance of her different aspects, she might have been a very, very great person. And in some ways, we have to be careful when we talk about the savage. We start by talking about the savage because that's how it seems, because it only comes out when we're in bad moods and we're being destructive. But maybe what we don't realize and we need time to metabolize is that these, what seem now to be savage things, like in the worst moments, might actually be the elements of a great person. You know, would I dare to say that Jodi, in another circumstance, could have a great woman inside of her, like a very great woman? She just totally underestimated the strength of what she had. She, in her fantasy of being such a prim and poised person, didn't realize she had a NFL, level, super strong superwoman on the inside. And of course, in a bad mood, watch out, but in other circumstances, that could have been marshaled together through integration. Maybe, I'm using my imagination, but maybe to constitute a very special woman, a very strong woman. But she would have had to go through a totally different life circumstance. And I don't know that it would have occurred to her by herself to choose that path, of just metabolizing and just dealing with the dissonance of having what would seem to be a very like too strong person inside of her, you know, and just letting that, kind of metabolize and discovering it's not just a savage, and it's interesting, I'm starting off saying it's a savage, but I'm also trying to show that what appears like a savage and we accept as a savage because it demonstrates itself to be a savage may just be one facet of a very strong part of us. Okay, that should be integrated, for better or for worse. I'm not saying it's a good part of us, it's just a part of us that in other circumstances could lead to a person being very strong. Okay, very strong, and that could be essentially even part of being a great woman. So do I dare to say that Jodi had in herself a great woman? Well, it depends on how you deal with it. You know, like just like in mythology, the gods. When the gods are great, they're exalted, wonderful beings. But when the gods are angry, or when the gods go crazy, it's just earthquakes and destruction. So, I challenge people to question when we talk about things like savages. I mean, to be honest, poetically, from a grassroots folk level, the savage part of me is a savage because that's how it presents. Okay, but maybe we should be take the risk, of kind of letting it into the, on the table, letting it on the stage, to see that maybe the destructive part is just one part and it could be facets of a great person. Okay, and I'm not speaking in terms of arrogance or grandiosity. This is not about narcissistic grandiosity. Grandiosity is when you dissociate things in yourself and you go into a fake personhood. Okay, this I'm talking about is the real thing inside of Jodi. Okay, that at times shows up in violence. Okay, or really nastiness, but had she let it in and worked with it, somehow metabolized it, it would just, those destructive parts would just be facets of a generally great, potentially great person. It would just depend, So like in my imagination, I can see how Jodi took the other path. Okay, and it never became anything more than a savage. Okay, and capable of tremendous destruction, much stronger than Travis. Travis was not matched. She was above him. Had Jodi been a better person, she would have been a much greater person than Travis. Had Jodi fully integrated, or been on the path towards integrating that greatness, I think she would have been very, very hesitant to be with a man who didn't have her level of greatness. But she shot herself in the foot by putting it off the stage and dissociating it. So she didn't even have that as part of her, so she could kind of navigate choosing men and not to choose weak or lesser, strength men. Yes, I realize that Travis was more sane than Jodi, but I don't think in terms of power, I don't think he was at the level, So, just some ideas. And trying to think of how to summarize this. Yes, I realize that Jodi, did take the path where she ended up being effectively all the cluster B, features of all the cluster B disorders, But, I leave it on the table as hope for all of us who have, let's say, maybe the feeling of having a savage on the inside or having cluster B issues that, maybe through another path, some of the worst things about us, we just don't realize they're just facets of something larger that could be great, but it has to be integrated and metabolized. And yes, some people do have, rampaging, really, really, out of control things inside. But, can we have the courage to see that maybe we just have something really strong on the inside and we're only seeing it when it comes out in anger or in, going crazy, maybe in other modes that could be part of a stronger, part of us, but it has to be, we can't anticipate the future. We have to first take the risk and just let it coexist and not dissociate it, and then let our natural organic metabolism just kind of process it. So yeah, I just leave it there. I think it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy, and it was a disaster. What happened? But I don't rule out the possibility that Jodi could have been a great person and may have, in a sense, a great person inside her that just hasn't been fully integrated. So, not trying to pat her on the back at all. I'm not trying to say she's not crazy. I think she was, a deeply disturbed person and has very serious diagnosable personality pathology. But I still don't diagnose. I still don't. Sorry. I still don't rule out the possibility that she could have been and may have inside of her a great woman. So, that's just life. Sometimes life gives you very kind of unsatisfying answers. And, I know it's not satisfying to say what I just said, but, I leave it as a possibility. And maybe it's uncomfortable, but, it may, something that does occur to me. And so, yeah, that's my final analysis of Jodi Arias. And thanks for watching.